I courteously thanked him for his invitation and told him I was simply a commoner visiting London for the very first time. This is when he said he felt something very special about me and asked if I could perhaps draw portraits of people, as this would be absolutely sufficient to have a reason to invite me in. I responded shyly that I was not a very special visitor and hoped I was not being confused with somebody else. Do not be too concerned about it, and know that as we spoke you have been investigated. You see, we know that everything is fine to have you as our young guest artist. Indeed, even then I was very efficient at drawing portraits in charcoals and soft pencils, and could paint in oils, but this experience was totally unexpected. Maybe, I pondered, just maybe, young people were more privileged here, but I was unsure. The very first person he introduced me to was Ma'am. At first I did not recognize her, but was extremely courteous towards her. She greeted and accepted me as a friend of the young prince. As advised, I tried not to show any excitement in meeting her. I suppose I was lucky to experience an occasion like this, let alone during my very first visit to London. We walked and frequented big halls under several names, and a gallery of excellent portraits from antiquity. Then I was invited to share a small meal in the great royal dining area, where I met his older brother, who eagerly spoke about Australia and his lovely times there. They were keenly interested in botanic sciences, like their mother. Later, in a different area within the palace grounds, I had the pleasure of drawing this young prince's portrait. I was told that the likeness I had created was exceptional, and was asked to do the same with others within this magnificent place. To me, being truly appreciated and accepted was the most important aspect of my first trip to London. A beautiful accommodation organized in South Kensington was truly wonderful. I was going to stay there and virtually live in London for several days until my return to Germany. I was officially invited back to Buckingham Palace before returning to Kirchheim Tech. I thought I was dreaming about that magnificent introduction to London, but it was something one could never forget. My mother had given me certain papers in a large envelope, which I was encouraged to keep hidden from other people who needed not know everything. Alas, I had the curious trend to look at everything before hiding them from others. It was something passed on to me specifically from my great-grandparents, and contained important papers which would be completely useless in Turkey, but would have an impact in Liechtenstein and elsewhere in Europe, even perhaps in Great Britain. I was wondering if that young prince had any idea about it. I had a very positive feeling about my unique and perhaps even accidental adventure, but felt that I did not need to worry about it. I was simply to accept and enjoy what life presented to me at the time. After a period of time in London, discovering new trends which the Brits presented, I felt more at home, and eventually leaving it behind when I had to return to Germany was not very appealing. I was so extremely and quickly accustomed to life in Britain. It really felt as if I had come back home. However, I could start a correspondence course with one of the colleges or an academy and whenever I decided to come back to London, I could sit for exams or continue with my higher education as a student. I was even offered very suitable accommodation in South Kensington if I returned. In fact, I contemplated that Great Britain could become my permanent or semi-permanent home. I was almost always ready for any trying exams and always prepared for any outcome. My greatest interest remained in medicine, particularly anatomy and also the arts. I was very passionate about what made a human into what a human was, what and who a human is. Perhaps then I could discover all about the living, growing old, and dying syndrome every one of us had to question. When I was invited to dinner in the great hall within the palace, where other dignitaries were assembled, everyone was having an exciting and wonderful time, especially when the mother, Her Majesty, made a brief appearance. This was completely unexpected. Personally, my food intake was no more than just tasting the cuisine so meticulously prepared by the royal cooks. In fact, food intake was not as important as being there and absorbing everything. Repeating myself, I knew I had come back home after spending a while in London. It was an experience I can never forget, whereas I could dismiss everything I knew of my past. Those weekends, when I took long walks along the streets of this wonderful city, they took me to so many interesting parts of the old and new town, from north to south and to the East End. A trip into Kent and the rugged shorelines was so magnificent and exciting. I was very sure that I would return one day, even if for a short while, perhaps to study. As I said, it was very hard for me to return to Germany after what I had experienced, but there was study to continue. Still a few more things to discover, and my then lady friend to further my relationship with. Sister Nerg was apparently very anxious about whether I was going to come back, and was happy when I returned. I remember how she prepared one of her special herb soups on my arrival, and we had a long, hearty talk. She was keen to know all about my experiences in London. She mentioned how wrongly they were informed about the British during the war. The following week, I was to continue my employment with the Bosch Junkers, and could not wait to meet Magdalene. However, when we met, she was more excited about what she had been studying with the brothers, and not what I had experienced. I did not think that she knew about my special journey, and was probably unable to show her excitement about my presence. Perhaps she did not even notice that I was missing for a while, or possibly because we were not meeting as often yet. It seemed that it did not make any difference if I was away. In reality, it did not bother me. But my memories of the time I spent working as a transformer tester for AEG remained alive for a while, where Magda's stepfather made hurtful comments about me, and I can never forget his sarcastic words. Once some Eastern European peasants were apparently given tasks to build small rockets they were using to bomb London. Obviously, they were enslaved in underground caverns, specially built for the purpose. It seemed incredible that one of the civilized nations of the world had been engaged in such a business of slavery. In short, I was happy not to associate with him at work. At the time of my visit to Great Britain, I hoped that I could apply for further studies at one of the universities. After several interviews, I discovered that I could sit for entry exams, and if successful, could further my studies in medicine, history, or psychology. My educational details and determinism seemed to have gained favor amongst the scholarly. Some declared that they were somewhat surprised about why young people like me chose to study in Germany. They may have felt uneasy about it due to their memories of the war. Others were not too pleased, considering that I had previously been wasting time in a country where my background was not regarded as worthy of any decent human existence. But none of this would present a problem if I chose to settle in Britain. However, I needed to go there on a student visa. This time I had traveled on a tourist one, which gave me a chance to get to know London and learn about the British before my return to Germany, although my stay on a tourist visa could be extended with the kind help of those wonderful friends in prominent positions. Unlike the stories told about how cold the Brits were, I discovered something totally different. I loved not only the city of London, but the somewhat extremely logical Brits who presented great potential to become permanent friends. If you like, call it one young heart's fantasy. This is also when I discovered a new interest there: science fiction. Some people advised me that I could earn money by drawing fine or science fantasy art for magazines if I wanted while studying in London. That would be ideal. This way, by being employed on a part-time basis, I could support my needs and studies. On my return, however, I was happy with my simple accommodation at Sister Nurk's. Supporting her a little with some expenses was certainly very welcome, and I was going to do it gladly for as long as I stayed there. But I can never forget that smelly concrete containment outside her lounge. When it snowed and was very cold, she often put an old-fashioned metal hot water bottle in my bed shortly before my arrival home after the drudgery of work. It was such a welcome idea in Germany's extremely cold winters. She had been living all alone before my arrival, and since her husband died, had no one to talk to. She was so happy telling me her own little stories, her joys and tragedies. Her husband had been a soldier some time ago, and they had shared a few sad and many joyful times together. She was very supportive of me, never wanting me to leave. When someone claimed anything wrong about me, she immediately showed genuine concern. She was not happy about the authorities willing to deport me to where I would be in great strife. She often emphasized that there had to be other ways to make my stay permanent in Germany. When she discovered my romantic interests with Magda, she was not only thrilled, but also talked to me excitedly, advising me to stand my ground. Be the only leader, because some others will try to take advantage of you, she said. I suppose I was embarking on an utopian journey. I later understood that I was dreaming of a perfect future, which was not to be. Magdalene, too, was likewise hoping for a fantastic future under the directive of the witnesses, who she adored above everything and everybody else. Remember, only the faithful would survive Armageddon to live forever, as it was apparently promised by the Lord in the Holy Scripts. The rest of humanity was to be wiped off, and evil would vanish from the face of the earth. During the following 1,000 years, under the lordship of Christ, all the Jehovah's Witnesses would build a new world order. After this period, Christ would release Satan the devil from the abyss to tempt the chosen of God, and those who passed those testing times would have everlasting life. However, all those who died before Armageddon would need to be physically resurrected, as it was also promised by God. According to them, their Bible is the Word of God, and it remains the only truth. This is why they all had to obey members of the Watchtower and Tract Society, which was based in Brooklyn, New York until recently. This is also where Bethel, the headquarters of their organization, is housed. Going back to my train of thought, I began to see Magdalene more often, almost on a daily basis, especially after she had spoken with her tutors, teaching her the ways of Jehovah, and they told her that it was all right to be befriended with me, as long as she avoided any sexual interest before marriage. Those tutors were never introduced to me, and I was kept totally in the dark. I was expected to be thankful for their decision to allow her to even have a friendship, let alone a little walk in the park with me. Years later I discovered that her every move was controlled, and all her major decisions needed to be approved by the witnesses. Admittedly, I was either too naive or fearful of losing her, and certainly did not care much about what the Jehovah's Witnesses would do. As I matured, I discovered the reality. I kept picking her up from the paper factory where she was employed, walking her home. As you can guess, we lived on more apples, bread, and a little wine when at her place. Imagine now two young lovers, he being eager talking about interesting subjects, astronomy and the beauty one could find everywhere if one looked for it, she being only eager to praise the good Lord at every opportunity. The warning signs were there, but I was only listening to the songs of heart. We often spoke about our backgrounds, education, and other interests, but she felt compelled to correct my ideas and worldly thoughts forever. I tried to ignore it, believing that the situation would eventually change as we got to know each other better. Alas, I was to discover that this trend was to continue throughout our association, even when married. As we walked together during that period of discovering each other's ways, we looked at lots of colorful flowers, from time to time even talking to them, as if they understood us. However, Magda showed an unusually extreme interest in talking to roses, trees, and pebbles on the ground, and this trend remained for a very long time. She may have been joking, but I was never sure. I cannot forget how, in the beginning, her parents considered me as if I was their savior. Yet there was always a minute amount of resentment on their part, which could be seen in their behavior.